What did you overhear right before the ceremony that made you turn around and walk away? I couldn't believe how fast my heart was racing in that dimly lit hallway. Just a few minutes before I was supposed to walk out in front of everyone, I could hear the low murmur of guests gathering in the chapel, the shuffle of feet on polished wooden floors, the distant chiming of instruments warming up to play the bridal processional. My fiancé, Brandon, was waiting somewhere on the other side of those grand double doors, and I was clutching my bouquet so tightly my knuckles turned white. The lace hem of my gown brushed against my ankles as I shifted uneasily on my feet. This was supposed to be the happiest day of my life, the big moment I had dreamed of since I was a teenager. But all I could think about was the sound of those hushed, urgent voices I'd just overheard from the little storage room to my left. I'd gone there in a desperate search for a moment of quiet. My nerves were in overdrive, and I needed a second away from my bridesmaids and relatives to breathe. Instead, I caught something that made my entire world tilt on its axis. Two people, one definitely a man, the other's voice a little softer, maybe female, were talking in panicked tones about the real reason for the ceremony. At first, I thought they might be discussing some last-minute wedding logistics, flowers out of place, a missing ring bearer, or the cake not arriving on time. But no. The man had said something about, "She doesn't have a clue what this is really about," and that phrase lodged itself in my heart like a blade. I heard a name, Brandon, and then the woman said, "You think she'd agree if she knew your father set this up to keep the business afloat?" That was all I managed to catch before I stupidly bumped my elbow on a shelf, making a loud thud. The conversation halted instantly, and I froze like a criminal caught in a spotlight. My chest felt tight as I backed away, terrified that whoever was in there would come out. I tripped over the train of my gown and stumbled into the corridor. My scalp prickled with sweat, and I heard my own blood roaring in my ears. All these months of planning, all the deposits paid, the invitations, the color scheme, the dress, the bachelorette party, the deep conversations with Brandon about our future, were they all just a facade? The possibility that my fiancé was marrying me for some hidden agenda exploded inside my mind. It was like everything around me started to warp, the smiling flower girl around the corner, the hush of the guests, the dusty church windows letting in stripes of afternoon light. Nothing felt real. Nothing felt safe anymore. I stood there trembling, trying to gather my courage. Part of me wanted to just brush it off, assume I'd misheard something, or hope it was a misunderstanding, but I couldn't. My intuition was screaming that what I'd overheard was the truth, that there was more to this wedding than love and commitment. My father had always disliked Brandon on some inexplicable level, and my mother had acted strangely supportive, yet I remembered her cryptic warnings. "Don't be too sure of anything, sweetheart." I thought she was just being protective. But now it felt like she knew something I didn't. Maybe more people knew. Maybe I was the only one left in the dark. A wave of nausea hit me. I struggled to calm myself. Deep breaths, I told myself, trying not to crush the pristine arrangement of roses and baby's breath in my arms. When my bridesmaid Tiffany peeked around the corner, I forced a smile, certain she saw right through me. I could hear the faint strains of the organ music starting up. The chords that signaled the ceremony was minutes away. But I couldn't just waltz out there pretending everything was fine. I needed answers. Now, the question was, how could I possibly confront Brandon without creating a scene in front of 200 guests, half of whom flew in from New York or California to see us tie the knot? How could I call off the wedding when people had come all this way, spent money on hotels, and rearranged their schedules? An ugly wave of guilt and shame washed over me at the very thought. Yet the alternative, stepping onto that aisle, saying "I do," all the while suspecting my marriage might be some kind of financial move, was unthinkable. And there I was, stuck between heartbreak and humiliation. My mind churned with memories of how Brandon and I first met in college, during a campus cleanup event. We ended up volunteering side by side. He laughed when I spilled a bucket of soapy water and teased me for wearing the most inappropriate shoes for manual labor. Then he offered to take me out for coffee. Our relationship had seemed so genuine, so natural. We spent nights in the dorm lounge discussing our life goals and fears, trading stories about our childhoods. He told me about growing up under pressure from his father, Daniel Carter, a self-made businessman who expected big things from his only son. I told Brandon about how my own dad was an elementary school teacher who just wanted me to be happy, but always seemed suspicious of men who got close to me, as if they had hidden motives. Brandon had laughed it off and said, "He'll warm up to me one day." And for a while, everything was perfect. We worked through typical couple arguments. We graduated, started our first real jobs, rented a tiny apartment with squeaky floors and a perpetually broken heater. Brandon proposed to me there on a rainy Friday night, with candles lit and a home-cooked dinner. He seemed nervous but earnest, telling me I was the best thing that had ever happened to him. I'd felt so secure, so loved in that moment. Thinking of it now, It was like being handed a piece of glass that turned out to be a mirror, only I was just now noticing the cracks that had always been there. As I stood shaking in that corridor, I realized I had two choices. I could ignore that snippet of conversation and go on with the ceremony, hoping to untangle the truth later. Or I could run. Run now. Run fast, and not care how many wedding programs were left uncollected on the chairs, how many side eyes I'd get from relatives, or how many thousands of dollars went down the drain. Could I live with a public fiasco if it saved me from a life of lies? My lip quivered at the thought, but a gnawing voice inside me whispered that ignoring this was the worst kind of self-betrayal. Before I could decide, the music volume swelled, and that was my cue. Tiffany gently touched my shoulder, her expression half excited, half anxious. "It's time," she mouthed, tucking a stray curl behind my ear. I felt my stomach drop and my feet started moving of their own accord, propelling me forward as though I were in a dream. The double doors would open, I would walk down that aisle, everyone would stand, cameras clicking away. My father was waiting to escort me. He looked so proud, adjusting his tuxedo jacket, his eyes glistening with tears of joy that I suddenly feared were about to morph into tears of heartbreak. I tried to steady my breathing, but my hands were shaking uncontrollably. Right before the doors opened, I glanced at my dad's face. There was a twitch in his jaw that told me something was off. He glanced at me, then quickly looked away as if he knew my world was about to collapse. My father had never been good at hiding emotions, and I saw in his eyes a flicker of sorrow, or maybe pity. Something inside me roared, "He knows," or at least suspects. Suddenly, that organ music I had fantasized about for months felt like the soundtrack of a horror movie. The doors swung open. The brilliant glow of the chapel lights hit me, and a sea of faces turned toward me. Rows of guests on either side, everyone smiling, standing, waiting to see a radiant bride. The smell of flowers was overpowering. The officiant stood near the altar, looking solemn and gracious. And Brandon, my handsome fiancé in a perfectly tailored suit, looked back at me with an expression I'd never seen before. His eyes were wide, almost startled, as though he sensed something in my gaze that didn't match the day's supposed joy. I took a step forward, my father's arm linked in mine. My knees felt like jelly. In my head, I replayed that overheard conversation. "She doesn't have a clue. The father set this up to keep the business afloat." My father's steady presence next to me was the only thing that kept me from collapsing. With each step, I battled the impulse to spin around and run, but I made it all the way to the front where Brandon took my hand. I felt the warmth of his palm, the slight tremble in his fingers. Could he sense my hesitation? He leaned in and whispered, "You look stunning," but his voice had a crack in it, some uncertain undertone. The officiant asked us to face each other. I was barely breathing. There, in front of everyone, under the eyes of 100 people who loved us, some traveling hundreds of miles, some old friends from college, some colleagues, and a few random extended relatives I hardly recognized, I confronted the possibility that my marriage was a sham, orchestrated by forces I had never suspected. As the officiant began speaking about love and commitment, about trust and devotion, tears burned the corners of my eyes. I stole a glance at Brandon. He looked tense, his jaw clenched. When the officiant asked us to declare our willingness to enter this union, the words lodged in my throat. My father's arm had slipped away as he took his seat, and I felt alone, pinned by all those stares. An almost audible hush fell. The officiant repeated the question, "Do you willingly and freely enter this covenant?" Brandon responded with a nod and a quiet, "I do." Then all eyes were on me. I forced air into my lungs and parted my lips. But instead of a vow, a strangled sound escaped me. My vision blurred with tears. That was the moment I couldn't go on. The fear and suspicion had grown so huge in my chest that it threatened to choke me. I did something I'd never imagined doing in a million years. I stepped back. My voice, shaking so badly it was barely comprehensible, said, I'm sorry." Then I let the bouquet slip from my fingers onto the floor. In that instant, the entire chapel erupted into whispers, gasps, confusion. Brandon reached out to me, but I stumbled away, hitching up my dress to avoid tripping. Everything became a swirling cacophony of exclamations. My mother stood up, her face stricken, as though she had seen a ghost. My father was also rising from his seat, heartbreak etched into every line on his face. Brandon looked at me in shock. I wanted to say something coherent to explain, but all I managed was a tearful, "I heard you, I heard everything," which only added to the puzzle in everyone's minds. Then I turned on my heel and ran down the aisle, my heart hammering so loud that I thought I might faint. I heard Brandon's voice calling my name. "Leah, wait!" And the stunned murmurs of our guests. But I didn't stop. I tore out of that chapel, pushing open the heavy doors, and stumbled onto the steps outside. The sky was bright and unforgiving. People were standing around, confused at the sudden commotion inside. I kept going, not caring if my bridal gown got caught on the pavement, not caring that my hair was falling down from the fancy updo my stylist had so painstakingly created. I ran until I found a quiet spot under an ancient oak tree in the churchyard. My chest was heaving, tears spilling down my cheeks, leaving salty tracks on my foundation. I heard footsteps behind me. Expecting to see Brandon, I whipped around defensively. But it was my bridesmaid and close friend Natalie, who caught up to me, short of breath, her pale pink dress swirling around her ankles. "Leah!" she gasped. "Leah, what happened?" She saw the tears, the anguish on my face, and her expression soft. "Oh my God, are you okay? Everybody's freaking out back there." I shook my head. "I heard something," I stammered. "Someone was talking about how Brandon only did this because his father needs to save the business. They said I hadn't a clue what was really going on." My voice cracked. "Nat, I can't marry him if there's any truth to that." She stared at me, her eyes wide with... "That's insane," she whispered. "Are you sure you didn't misunderstand?" But even as she said it, doubt crept into her voice. She knew me well enough to realize I wouldn't blow up my own wedding over a trivial rumor. I pressed my trembling lips together, thinking about the scuffle of footsteps and the hush in that storage room, the clear mention of Brandon's father's involvement. No, I was certain. Something was definitely not right. A moment later, Brandon emerged from the chapel, scanning the grounds until he spotted me. He was flanked by his mother, Janet Carter, and his best man, Ethan. Brandon's face was pale and he looked just as rattled as I felt. He walked toward me slowly, hands raised in a gesture of peace. "Leah," he said quietly, "please, let's talk." My heart lurched. Part of me wanted to fling myself at him, to beg him to tell me it was all some horrible misunderstanding, to hold me and wipe away these doubts. But another part of me was furious that he'd let me get all the way here, to our wedding day, without telling me the whole truth. If he was under some financial or familial pressure, why hadn't he confided in? "Tell me the truth," I demanded, my voice wavering. "Is your father behind this? Is this marriage about saving his business?" My friend Natalie stood at a slight distance, looking torn, not wanting to intrude on our private conversation, but obviously concerned for my well-being. Brandon swallowed hard. He glanced at his mother, who pressed her lips together in a thin line. Then he said, "It's complicated. My dad did encourage me to propose. He said it would be beneficial for our family if we, formed an alliance with yours. But Leah, I swear, I love you. This isn't just about money." I felt as though the ground was slipping from under me. "Encouraged you how?" I asked hollowly. "Did he threaten you? Did he bribe you?" Ethan, looking anguished, finally spoke up. "Brandon, man, just tell her. She deserves to know everything." Janet Carter threw Ethan a scorching look, but he continued anyway, turning to me. "It's not just your family's money. It's about your dad's connections, too. Daniel Carter is in a financial pinch, and he thought if Brandon got married to you, it would help reassure potential investors. You know, show that the Carter family is stable, that they have ties to a well-regarded community figure like your dad." My nails dug into my palms so hard I nearly drew blood. I stared at Brandon's mother, who looked away, flustered. Then at Brandon, who was practically trembling. "So that's it?" I said, my voice a raw whisper. "That's the reason you proposed? Because your father wanted a convenient business deal sealed by a wedding?" He shook his head vigorously, stepping closer. "No, not entirely. Leah, we were together for years before he even brought it up. I loved you since college. But yes, he pushed me to do it when he realized your family had resources that could help. He offered to cover the down payment on our first home if I proposed sooner rather than later. And he implied that if I didn't move forward, he'd disown me, or at least cut me off financially." I was torn. I knew I wanted to marry you eventually, but the timing ended up being about him. Tears blurred my vision. "That's still manipulation," I whispered. "He made our wedding day into some corporate tactic, and you never told me." My voice cracked on the last words. "You never gave me the chance to decide if I wanted to be part of this. You let me believe this was entirely about love." "It is about love," Brandon insisted, reaching for my hand. I pulled back. "I fell in love with you the minute I saw you, but my dad meddled, and I was too afraid to lose him, to lose his support. I thought, once we were married, I'd tell you, and we'd move on. I didn't expect it to blow up on our wedding day." "Who told you?" I almost laughed at that. Does it matter who told me? The point is, I overheard enough to realize I've been lied to. I tried to calm the trembling in my voice. "I can't walk back in there and pretend everything's perfect. This is the worst betrayal." My tears fell freely now. Brandon looked miserable, a reflection of all I felt. But it didn't erase the harm. Suddenly, my father and mother pushed through the small crowd that had formed around us. My dad had tears in his eyes, and my mom's expression was pure heartbreak. My father's gaze darted between me and Brandon, and I saw shame flicker across his face. "Leah," he started quietly, "maybe we should find a private place to discuss this." His reaction confirmed my worst fear. He knew. Or at least he'd suspected. The air seemed to vanish from my lungs. "Dad," I said, my tone laced with betrayal, "did you know about their plan?" He hesitated. My mother answered for it. "He had suspicions," she admitted softly, "but he never thought it was so severe. Your father noticed that Daniel Carter was pushing for an earlier date for the wedding. The combination of new investments, financial rumors, everything. But we thought Brandon truly loved you. We thought it wouldn't matter if there was some business interest at stake." "Wouldn't matter?" My voice pitched higher in disbelief. "Of course it matters. This entire ceremony is built on half-truths. How could you both let me go through with all these plans without telling me the truth?" My dad looked angry. I didn't have proof, and I wanted to give Brandon the benefit of the doubt. The times I talked to him, he seemed genuinely devoted to. I didn't want to ruin your wedding over a possibility. I was torn. I let out a bitter laugh. You were torn. He was torn. Meanwhile, I was blissfully organizing a wedding that was partially orchestrated by the Carter family's business interests. My throat burned with every word. Brandon tried to interject. "Leah, I know you don't believe me right now, but what I feel for you is real. My father's involvement was just me being too weak to stand up to him." Janet Carter stepped forward, her eyes blazing. "Don't put this all on Daniel. You had a choice, Brandon." He clenched his jaw. "I know. I messed up, okay? I didn't want to lose Leah, but I also couldn't stand the thought of being cut off. So I tried to have it both ways. Now I'm paying the price." Silence clung to the air, thick with tension. Our families and friends were scattered around, some peeking out from the chapel doors, others gathering in the courtyard, everyone unsure whether the wedding would continue or not. The officiant, no doubt, was still standing at the altar, utterly confused. I felt drained, hollow, betrayed, but also heartbreakingly sad because despite everything, I did love Brandon. We'd built a life together. We had memories that I still cherish. But how could I move forward, knowing trust was shattered? My mother placed a hand lightly on my arm. "Leah," she said gently, "it's your decision. No one can force you to walk back in there. If you need time, take it." I swallowed the lump in my throat. "I can't do this," I said, my voice shaking. "Not like this." My gaze drifted from Brandon to the church steps, where I saw so many pairs of eyes looking on with concern, confusion, pity. "I'm leaving. I'm sorry to everyone who came, but I can't stand up at that altar and lie." Brandon's hand twitched at his side as though he wanted to grab me. "Wait," he pleaded. "Let's go somewhere private. We can talk it through. Maybe we can still—" "No," I cut him off, tears rolling down my cheeks. "You should have told me. Months ago. I could have handled the truth, but I can't handle this." I gestured at the entire fiasco around us. "Just let me go. I need to think. I need to breathe." And with that, I turned, lifted the skirt of my gown, and walked across the lawn, heading for the street. I vaguely heard someone call my name, my mom, maybe, but I didn't look back. Passers-by gawked as a bride stormed out of her own ceremony in broad daylight, tears streaming down her face, hair undone, wedding dress dragging on the grass. The humiliation was nearly unbearable, but it paled next to the agony of betrayal. I flagged down a taxi I spotted idling nearby, probably one that had dropped off a late-arriving guest. The driver stared at me in astonishment, but I just sobbed out, "Please, drive. Anywhere." He shrugged and nodded, and I climbed in, hugging myself, feeling the lace and satin bunched around me. The faint smell of cheap air freshener mingled with the perfume from my wedding dress, a nauseating blend that made me want to be sick. I kept wiping my eyes, trying to process the scale of what had just happened. I'd walked away from my own wedding. I had no phone with me. It was back in the bridal suite, and I wasn't even sure if I had money for the cab. I checked the little beaded clutch I'd been carrying. It contained a credit card, my ID, and some emergency cash. Perfect. I looked out the window, watching the streets pass in a blur of color. People hurrying by, cars speeding along, the unstoppable current of city life contrasting with my own personal meltdown. After a few minutes, the driver asked me where I wanted to go. I hesitated. My apartment was shared with Brand. The idea of returning there felt horrific at the moment. My parents' house was an option, but I didn't want to face them yet. Not after learning they'd suspected something and never told me. My mind drifted to the friend I trusted most outside my immediate circle, Alyssa, who lived about 20 minutes away. She had always been a steady presence in my life, though we'd lost touch for a while when she moved for her career. Recently, she'd returned, and we'd reconnected over dinner once or twice. It felt like a safe harbor. I gave the driver her address, and he nodded without judgment. While he drove, I pressed my head against the glass window, letting the tears flow silent, trying to imagine what my life would be after this. When we arrived, I paid the driver, carefully stepped out of the cab, and hurried up to Alyssa's door in my wedding gown. She lived in a small townhouse with a neat front yard. I rang the doorbell, trembling, hoping she was home. A moment later, the door opened, and there she stood, wearing sweatpants and a surprised expression. Leah? Holy, what's going on? Why are you here in your dress? Is the wedding over already? Concern flooded her voice. I stood there, not knowing how to begin. Then I burst into fresh tears. She quickly ushered me inside, closed the door, and guided me to her couch. Just breathe, she said, rushing to grab tissues. You look like you've seen a ghost. I tried to gather myself. I overheard something, I began. The words came tumbling out in a flood. I told her everything. The conversation, Brandon's confession, how I stood at the altar unable to speak, and how I bolted from the chapel. By the end, Alyssa's eyes were huge with shock and indignation. Oh my God, Leah. That's beyond messed up. I'm so sorry this happened to you, she said, hugging me. But I'm proud of you for walking out if it meant saving yourself from a life built on lies. I let out a shuddering breath, resting my head against her shoulder. Right now, I just feel like a fool. A pathetic bride who got humiliated in front of everyone. Even worse, maybe I humiliated Brandon if he actually does love me. Alyssa drew back and looked me firmly in the eye. Don't you dare blame yourself for any of this. You're not the one who orchestrated some scheme. If Brandon truly loves you, that's on him for letting his father manipulate the situation. And if your dad knew something was off, well, that's on him too. None of this is your fault. For the first time in hours, I felt a spark of relief. The tears still came, but the shame began to give way to anger. Righteous, blazing anger that I'd been taken for a ride. Thank you, I whispered, hugging her back. She led me upstairs to her spare room and helped me out of my wedding dress. The sight of that gown, so beautiful, now so meaningless, made me want to sob again. The delicate buttons, the lace sleeves, all the alterations I'd spent hours agonizing over. But I took it off and folded it carefully, as though it were a wounded thing. Alyssa lent me a t-shirt and sweatpants, which felt absurdly comforting. I sank onto the bed, burying my face in the pillow. For a moment, everything was quiet except for my soft weeping. Eventually, Alyssa sat beside me, stroking my hair. Are you going to talk to Brandon again? She asked gently. He'll probably try to reach you. I sniffled, wiping my cheeks. I have to, eventually. He's basically my fiancé, even if I've probably just ended that engagement. But right now, I don't want to see him. She nodded. You don't have to do anything until you're ready. If you want, you can stay here as long as you need. I'll field calls for you if you want me to. We'll figure it out. I thanked her, beyond grateful for the sanctuary. Alyssa left me alone with my thoughts for a while. My phone, left behind at the chapel, must have been blowing up. I wondered if my mother or father had tried to reach me, or if Brandon had texted me 1,000 times begging for forgiveness. The thought made my stomach churn. All the love I felt for him was tangled up now with betrayal and hurt, so severe I could hardly breathe. That night was one of the longest I'd ever experienced. I barely slept, my mind racing with scenarios of how I'd confront Brandon. I replayed every milestone in our relationship, searching for clues or red flags I might have missed. Did he ever drop hints that his father was behind our engagement? Had there been subtle signs that he was pushing for marriage sooner than necessary? I recalled him once saying, "My dad is so excited about our future," but I hadn't considered that suspicious at the time. It had seemed normal for a father to be happy for his son. Now every memory felt tainted, overshadowed by the knowledge that the Carter family had orchestrated part of our union. Early the next morning, Alyssa knocked gently on the spare room door and handed me a cup of coffee. You okay? She asked, voice soft with concern. I sat up, hair disheveled, eyes puffy. I look like a wreck, don't I? I managed a sad smile. She shrugged sympathetically. You look like someone who just faced the biggest heartbreak of her life. Don't be hard on yourself. I sipped the coffee, savoring its warmth. I don't even know what to do next. Alyssa rubbed my shoulder. One step at a time. Think about what you want. And by that, I mean what you truly want, not what your parents or Brandon's father. I nodded, letting the caffeine settle into my system. Maybe I should call my mom, I murmured. She handed me her phone, and I dialed my mom's number. My mom answered on the second ring, her voice trembling with relief. Leah, oh God, are you all right? Where are you? I'm safe, I whispered, tears gathering again. I'm at Alyssa's. She exhaled audibly. We were worried sick. Nobody knew where you went. Your phone and purse were left in the bridal. Are you? Can I see you? Maybe you can come home or your father and I can come get you. I closed my eyes. I need some space, Mom. I'm not ready to see Dad yet. Or Brandon, obviously. She sniffled. All right, honey. I understand. Just let me know when you're ready. But please, let's talk soon. We love you. And I'm so sorry about everything. When I hung up, I felt spent, but at least I had let my family know I was alive. The wedding fiasco was undoubtedly the talk of the town by now. My relatives, Brandon's relatives, everyone was probably buzzing with gossip. I fought off a wave of mortification. Let them talk, I told myself, shutting my eyes. At least I wasn't stepping blindly into a marriage founded on half-truths. Over the next few days, I stayed with Alyssa, ignoring phone calls from unknown numbers. She went out to buy me a few essentials. A toothbrush, fresh clothes, since my entire wardrobe was back at the apartment I shared with Brandon. I spent hours just pacing, journaling, occasionally bursting into tears or cursing in anger. My emotions swung wildly. Sometimes I missed Brandon so much that I ached for him. Other times, I wanted to fling something across the room just thinking of how he'd hidden this from me. On the third day, I finally agreed to talk to him. He'd reached out through Alyssa, texting her multiple times. Please, he wrote, I just need to see Leah and apologize properly. I'll do anything. I told her he could come over while she was there so I wouldn't be alone. When he arrived, I was sitting in the living room, arms crossed tightly over my chest. Alyssa hovered in the kitchen, ready to intervene if things got too intense. Brandon entered looking disheveled and exhausted. Dark circles rimmed his eyes and his normally neat hair was messy. It was the first time I'd seen him look genuinely broken. Leah, he said, voice rough. I'm so sorry. I know those words probably mean nothing to you right now, but I have to say them. I studied him, trying to keep my composure. Talk, I said flatly. He exhaled, sinking onto the armchair across from me. I messed up. I let my dad's influence warp something that was supposed to be beautiful. I always planned on marrying you out of love. I swear that's the truth. When I was ready to propose, Dad found out and essentially tried to turn it into a business arrangement. He wanted me to speed it up, wanted to use the wedding to secure investors for Carter Enterprises. I should have refused, or at least told, but I didn't. I went along with it, hoping it would all work out. I thought we'd get married, be happy, and eventually I'd tell you that Dad had a heavy hand in the timing. But I never wanted to hurt you like this. My throat tightened. You do realize that not telling me is just as big a betrayal as doing it in the first place, right? I whispered. I spent all those months preparing for the happiest day of our lives, never knowing your family was basically orchestrating half of it. He pressed the heels of his palms to his eyes. I know, and I hate myself for it. You have every right to be furious. We sat there in tense silence. Finally, I asked, so where do we go from here? His voice cracked. I love you more than anything. If it means losing my father's support, if it means giving up Carter Enterprises, then I'll do it. I just don't want to lose you. I'll walk away from his business. I'll get a regular job somewhere else. Anything to prove to you that I'm serious, that this isn't about the money. Bitterness twisted inside. That offer would have meant something months ago. But now, after you've shattered my trust in front of everyone, how can I just forget what happened? He looked down, silent for a moment. Then he said, I understand I can't expect you to trust me right away. That's why I'm here, to see if there's even a chance you'll give me time to earn it back. I'll do whatever it takes. I stared at him, tears brimming. I honestly don't know, Brandon. Part of me loves you, but another part of me is so hurt I can't see straight. He nodded. I accept that. Alyssa chose that moment to walk in with a pitcher of water, giving us a gentle excuse to break the tension. Brandon cleared his throat. I'll leave if you want me to, but please, just think about what I said. I'm not lying about being willing to break from my dad's plans. I stayed silent. My chest ached with conflicting feelings, the memory of how tender and sincere he could be, and the fury at his deception. Finally, I said, for now I need space. Maybe after some time I'll call you. It wasn't a promise of reconciliation, but it was a small opening, and that was all I could manage. He nodded sadly and stood. I'll wait for you, however long it takes. After he left, I broke down crying again, and Alyssa held me while I wept. Days passed. My phone was returned to me by my father, who dropped it off at Alyssa's doorstep, giving me space as I'd requested. Dozens of missed calls, hundreds of unread messages, some from guests, some from relatives, many from Brandon. I ignored most of them, still struggling to sort through my swirling emotions. Eventually, I replied to some family members, letting them know I was okay but needed time. People were kind overall, though I sensed plenty of speculation swirling around. Everyone wanted to know the real story, but I had no interest in fueling gossip. Weeks turned into a month. I found a short-term sublet near Alyssa's place. A small studio with minimal furniture, but it gave me privacy. My father tried multiple times to visit or invite me home, and I finally agreed to see him in a neutral setting, a coffee shop around the corner. We sat at a small table by the window. He looked older somehow, weighed down by guilt and sadness. I can't tell you how sorry I am, he began, hands trembling around his mug of coffee. I never wanted you to be dragged into this. If I had solid proof, I would have told you outright, but I didn't. Daniel Carter was always so guarded. I heard rumors that his company was in trouble, that he saw your engagement as a chance to stabilize things. But I kept telling myself that Brandon really loved, and I think he does. I told myself maybe it wasn't so bad. I bit my lip, trying not to cry again. I needed to know, Dad. I needed the truth no matter how messy it was. He nodded solemnly. I know. I was wrong. I was scared to sabotage your happiness if it turned out to be just a rumor. Looks like I sabotaged it anyway by not warning you. I hope one day you can forgive me. He reached out a hand and I let him hold mine. Despite my anger, I still loved him deeply. It was impossible to stay furious forever. Parents make mistakes. So do children. We talked for over an hour, clearing the air. It helped, but it didn't solve the core issue. My relationship with Brandon was in tatters. In the following weeks, he tried to show me he was serious about changing. He withdrew from Carter Enterprises, shocking everyone in his family. His father, Daniel, apparently exploded with rage. He cut Brandon off financially, as threatened. Brandon moved out of our apartment and into a small rental to stand on his own feet. All these were big gestures, yet I couldn't just flip a switch and trust him again. I was proud he was stepping away from the toxic influence that had overshadowed our relationship, but I still felt raw.